Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I'm your usual host here on the program. My name is Joe Kuzma, and I welcome you once again. Any of the new and returning listeners, thank you for tuning in. Today, I'm going to kick the show over to a guest host who also has a very special guest. But before I do, I also have some other exciting news for Steelers Nation. Yes, those of you fans who are interested in attending a Steelers game, whether it be home or away during the 2017 season, I want you to head on over to our official partner. That's right, Steel City Underground has partnered with StubHub. You've heard of them before. They are your official stop for any type of concert, event, or sporting tickets. And right now they're offering Steelers fans as of, well, if you're listening to it now, from the stroke of midnight on June 9th up until 11:59 Eastern Time on June 11th, you could get 10% off any tickets for any Steelers game, home or away. There's different terms and conditions. You'll want to go over to steelcityunderground.com or check out the show notes of this very podcast yourself on whatever platform you're using it on for those specific details, and also the promo code and the link you'll want to click on in order to get that discount. Of course, clicking on that link helps Steel City Underground, and it'll also help you save 10% off. Just don't forget the promo code. But getting back to the focus for today's episode, I have a guest host with me. His name is Ron Lippock of the Pittsburgh Sports Daily Bulletin, and he brings with him a former Pittsburgh Steeler. So without further ado, I'm going to kick this over to you, Ron. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks, Joe. As you suggested, have a special guest. We have Carlos Emmons here, who is a seventh-round draft pick from the Steelers back in '96, and has got some great perspective on what it takes to be an outside linebacker in the NFL, what it takes to make that transition from defensive lineman in college and all the way to playing that sort of versatile position at outside linebacker in the NFL. So, Carlos, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you guys for having me.
Well, before we get into the sport, I want to hear a little bit about what's going on with you and sort of outside the sport. I know you've got your own businesses. If you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing with your personal life and how that's going.
Oh, yeah. I purchased a franchise called Wet Willie's. I opened in Atlanta, Georgia on Piedmont Road. And I'm about 7.5 years in on that. And everything's going well. It's been a great experience to step into another aspect of business and try to broaden my horizon.
You to bring any of that into Pittsburgh or up in the D.C. area where some of us are?
I actually looked at the D.C. area before. I hadn't got back up there to do extensive work in it, but there's a possibility there.
Yeah, well, we should talk. That's where I am actually now, so we'll talk business after this maybe sometime.
Okay.
So, yeah. So how much of the Steelers have you been following since your time as a retired player? Are you following the Steelers at all? Are you following football and the draft at all?
Oh, yeah, I follow the Steelers. I follow the draft. I mean, I grew up a Steelers fan my whole life, so I'm going to always follow the Steelers.
Well, that's good. So, this year they drafted T.J. Watt, obviously, in the first round, and a guy by the name of Keon Adams in the 7th round, both projected to be outside linebackers. And I just thought that you were in a unique position to talk about what it takes to make a roster. Keon being a 7th round pick, you being a 7th round pick. Keon's got a guy that was drafted in the 1st round, and you had a guy named Stephen Conley who was drafted in the 3rd round. So there's some similarities in two guys on the outside being brought in, fighting over some of the positions and trying to make a roster. Tell me a little bit about what it's like as a rookie to try to make that adjustment from college to the NFL, especially at that position.
Well, the adjustment for me wasn't as hard because as a player, I was a late bloomer as far as when I grew. So I came out in high school as a cornerback, was playing cornerback, and then moving to safety as I got bigger, and then maybe a little bit of outside linebacker as a senior. So me getting to the side where I could play defensive end partly in college, and then going back to linebacker wasn't as big of a transition because I had been covering and running around with receivers and things like that my whole life, actually. So it wasn't that bad.
So when you get there, your coverage skills gave you a little bit of an advantage. If for those who don't have that sort of coverage background, I don't think Keon Adams had that. And I remember you have that corner background from high school. But guys like Watt and guys like Keon Adams, they don't have that experience. What is your advice to a guy who's trying to learn as a big guy, as a linebacker, as a defensive lineman, how to make that adjustment to cover in space, which is what it's required from that position?
I think it's going to come with repetition. I think the great thing that they do in Pittsburgh is, even when I was there, when it was me and Jason was more of a rush guy. So they would pattern the defense around whichever one of those guys is a better rusher and whichever one is a better dropper to kind of offset what could go on. I think for the most part, Jason rushed all the time when I was there. Yeah, we had certain defenses where we both dropped, but if it was a push come to shove, I was going to be the guy who was in coverage.
Does that get frustrating? I mean, especially as a young guy coming in and you want to make an impact, how frustrating is that when you find yourself sort of back in coverage when you want to show what you got on the line and try to make an impact in the backfield?
It was frustrating early on in my career. I pushed forward. But then as I realized in talking to guys like Dick LeBeau and then going to Philly with Jim Johnson and guys like that, they stressed the importance of me being able to do that, play that coverage role, and how much better it made the defense. So in that aspect, I started to get it. I was looking at it more of a team aspect. I wasn't thinking about stats. I was thinking about winning.
And on the pass rush side, if you're a TJ Watt, if you're especially Keon Adams, who's really another seventh round pick kind of guy, what are the skills you're looking to adopt when you're first really getting to the NFL level of becoming a pass rusher? Because a lot of these guys, you hear they're drafted, but they're pretty raw, but they've got all the skills in terms of the athleticism, but they don't have the technique necessarily, a lot of these guys. So when you came in, what did they teach you about technique? What makes, in terms of technique, a good pass rusher versus maybe an average or poor, for that matter, pass rusher?
I think you have to work on your hand-eye coordination a lot, but the most important thing for any pass rusher is ball get-off. So you have those guys who some guys have a knack for. You look at the greatest pass rushers in the history of the league, most of them were great because they got off the ball extremely fast. You may have 10 other guys that are faster than them in a race, but getting off the ball and anticipating the snap is a gift. And some guys have it, some guys don't.
Do you think all the combine work and all the pro day stuff, are they able to catch that part of that? Because it seems that, to your point, they measure the speed, they measure you in the 20, they measure your cone drills and how high you jump, and that's not something that I'm not sure everyone's looking at, but it seems more critical than some of those other things. Do you think they're doing a better job of looking at that stuff?
Oh, definitely. They look at it a lot better than when I came to the league. Like now you see them emphasizing like a guy's time in the first 10, in the first 20. They're timing everything now. It used to be they just cared about how fast he ran the 40. Now they're breaking guys down in his first 10 yards, first 20 yards, first 30 yards. So they want to see guys with that burst. And you have a guy who's 330 pounds, nose guard, you're not really concerned about him running a 40. They're looking at how fast that guy covers 5-10 yards because that's what he's going to be doing on a regular basis in the game.
Yeah, it does crack me up when I hear about the 40-yard dash times of defensive linemen. Is you don't want those guys having to run 40 yards on a play or something's wrong. So.
Yeah, if a 330-pound defensive lineman has to run 40 yards to save the game, you're going to lose.
Exactly. So tell me a little bit about, you're watching the Steelers now. It sounds like you're staying in touch with what they're doing. How has that defense changed from the defense that you knew and played in?
I mean, they've continued to emphasize like linebacker and defensive lineman play. I think they had years where, especially when Palomalo was there, I think the defensive backs were a lot better than at other times. But now I think with the explosiveness of the offense, the defense has changed a lot because they're playing a lot. They're having to play a lot more with leads, and I think that's going to put more pressure on your secondary. And I think they've had to switch up a lot of things based on that.
You hear a lot about the Steelers trying to get closer to that man coverage scheme versus the zone coverage that they played. What are your thoughts on that? And there's always this chicken and the egg that you hear. If you have a good pass rush, the secondary plays well, and it helps the secondary. If the secondary plays well, the pass rush is benefited from that. From your perspective in that chicken and egg conversation, which is more important, the pass rush or the coverage skills?
I think pass rush is probably a lot more important because a great D-line is not giving the quarterback much time to think will turn an average cornerback into a great-looking cornerback if he realizes that the quarterback won't have that much time. I think that's come with a lot of the veteran cornerbacks in certain blitzes, or they know that they have a certain defensive end who's having a great day against an offensive tackle. They'll sit on routes a lot more because they know the quarterback won't have much time to get out there. And it all comes with reps and comes with experience.
So you're getting back to these guys that have come in as draft picks for the Steelers this year. What would you recommend to them? I mean, in terms of actual skills and practicing a specific skill or technique, what would you tell, especially a guy like Keon Adams who's coming in the 7th round? He's really got it like you did. He really has to fight for his spot on the roster, whereas TJ Watt has to do something dramatically awful to not make the roster as a first-round pick, and clearly he will. So as a guy who gets it as a 7th-round pick, what would you tell Keon Adams if he had to work on 2 or 3 things to make this roster in any way, shape, or form? What are those things from your perspective?
I would tell him to take the mindset that I took when I came in. When I got to Pittsburgh, they took Steve Conley early, and Earl Holmes was a 4th-round pick. So they had 2 linebackers they had taken higher, and it was obvious in the way I was treated when I first got there. So in talking to the older players, like Von Kirkland, Greg Lloyd, they initially told me, you just got to shine on special teams. But I was at the point where they weren't even putting me in on special teams. I was so deep on the depth chart. So I took that and I started trying to shine in individual drills in practice. Like when we went against people one-on-one, anything, I tried to make a name for myself. And it took that first preseason game when they were supposed to play a whole quarter before me, but Coach Cowell decided to put us all in together. And I took that opportunity to make my own name. And from that point, they started treating me the same as them in practice, where when they went in, I went in. They got reps, I got reps. Right? So I think he has to just stay patient, learn this defense. And that was another thing I did. I picked up the defense a lot faster than the other rookies. So I think you can play a lot faster when you get in the playbook and you know what you're doing. So I think to make a name, he initially needs to get in that playbook and make sure he knows what he's doing and they can trust putting him on the field.
Were there any other players, especially obviously the vets, who really took you under their wing even a little bit and said, hey, in terms of helping to learn the playbook, right? I mean, everyone has a different learning capacity or learning speed, but it seems like you picked it up, like you suggested, pretty quickly versus some of those other guys. What enabled you to do that, and how much did some of those vets really help you do so?
I think I just really was staying up late at night in that book. I was willing to sacrifice sleep and be tired and meetings and things of that sort the next day because I just felt so much better knowing what I was doing. There's nothing like being on the football field and hearing calls and not knowing where you're supposed to go. And you can't always trust a vet to help you get that way when you're pushing for their job.
Yeah, I've heard stories where vets will tell you. I heard stories where vets will tell you wrong information in some of the interviews they've done in the past, just to sort of keep a little bit at bay.
I think that's what made me push it a little harder. We had vets who were probably going to be borderline if all of us rookies made that team, where they were on the border of getting cut. And we had vets where a particular vet actually gave us the wrong call. And from that point, I never asked again. I learned it on my own.
Yeah, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. In terms of competitiveness with the guys that you came in on the draft class with, so you came in with guys, like you said, you got two other linebackers, especially ones drafted ahead of you in Holmes and Jay Conley again. How tight were you guys? Were you guys sort of bonded together? Were you looking out from from under the helmets, knowing that you're trying to take each other's chance to make a team?
No, we actually never looked at it that way. We literally were together every single day. We were living in the same apartment, like we were that close. So we came in with a bond, and we came in with the goal of all of us being on that team. And luckily, we all made the team. I think it was the most linebackers they ever kept on the roster in the history of the Steelers.
Well, you guys were really.
They made that.
Yeah,
they let that be known in that first meeting after the final cut, where it was coaches in the meetings mad. I guess they had spirited debates about who's going to have to give up players and
what unit has
told us
short.
in the meeting, you guys better live up to it. We keeping all these linebackers on the roster. So,
yeah, that's no pressure, right?
Right.
So tell me a little bit, going back to the Steelers scheme here. You got Butler stepping in for LeBeau. You know LeBeau obviously quite well. Are you familiar with any of the players on the roster now, especially guys like Harrison, who's been there since the Stone Age? You know these guys, any of them at all?
I don't know James personally, but I'm definitely familiar with his game. I watch him all the time.
I'm just curious to see if, with the new scheme under Butler, and even just as someone who watches the games, have you noticed anything dramatically different about what he's doing versus LeBeau? He certainly has done some changes in what the defense is doing and the goals of the defense. Have you noticed any of that? What are your thoughts on any of that?
Well, I think with LeBeau, he was more of a guy who could adjust on the fly. I'm not sure how the new guy is, but with LeBeau, we would come in and we may be blitz heavy. We may have a blitz heavy scheme coming in to a game. If we start the game off and things aren't going well, he'll pull out a board on the sideline. We may change the whole way the scheme is going for the rest of the game. You got to learn it on the spot. And I think that's what made him so valuable as a coach. Like, he would adjust on the fly, and instead of going down in flames for the whole game, like some coaches will, just by sticking to their scheme, LeBeau could adjust on the fly and change things as the game went on. So, I mean, with the new guy, I'm not sure. I don't really know enough of his background to know what type of coach he is, but I think that was the strength of Dick LeBeau.
His flexibility and his adaptability, and Cowher certainly seemed to give him some free rein on that front, right?
Yeah, Cowher pretty much stayed out of it when it came to LeBeau in that aspect.
Yeah, probably wise. So tell me a little bit more about your time in Pittsburgh. You were there for 4 years, 96 through 99, and then your time comes up as a free agent, and you leave for Philadelphia. And how hard was that to leave, especially a team that you grew up as a fan of? How hard is it to leave a team? And do fans really, you think, appreciate how hard it is, on a personal level, not as an athlete, but on a personal level? Do you think fans get how hard it is for players to transition from one city to the next, fighting to make a roster every week or every year? I sometimes wonder if fans truly care or get that personal side of the game that players go through.
Yeah, I don't think they really get it. But with my situation, it was tough for me to leave, but it was a situation that I saw coming a year before, so I was prepared for it. When we had guys come in, we had Joey Porter come in behind me and Mike Vrabel, so I knew we had great talent coming into that team. But I had a conversation with Joey, before I left. I told him exactly how the situation was going to go. I said, Jason's contract he has a year left. I said, if Jason resigns, I won't be here next year. You're going to be the outside backer. If Jason doesn't resign, they're going to resign me, and it'll be me and you on the outside. I said, that's the way the business works. I said, we're all not going to stay here. Right. So when Jason resigned, I told him, I was like, well, it's your job next year because I'll be gone.
It was nice playing with you. Yeah. And how do you like?
So I knew how the business side worked.
Yeah. And how do you like Philly? Was that a step in a direction that you felt good about after you made it?
Yeah, I came into Philly, and they Jim Johnson put a lot on me. I think I built up the trust in him like early on, so they allowed me to do a lot of things. They put a lot of responsibilities on me, and I embraced that role. And the fact that we were winning so much, anytime you're on the winning team, it's a fun time. Because the NFL can be a situation where you can win 10 games in a row and you lose one game. That's the worst week of work ever. Like, it's like walking on eggshells. Like, everybody's like, feels like the world is about to end after one loss. So when you're on a winning team, it's such a much better feeling to go to work every day.
Well, and speaking of sort of having a good feeling, I wanted to sort of step back on that Pittsburgh scheme because I had a question. And I know this is something that I think a lot of fans pull their hair out over when they watch sort of the Steelers scheme, where it's sort of the bend but don't break scheme. And you let a lot happen in front of you, but you don't give up that big play. As a player, how hard is that for you, especially maybe even as a pass rusher, or where you're doing what you can, but because the corners are sort of charged to stay off the receiver a little bit and keep things in front of them, a lot of plays and a lot of first downs continue to happen because you're more afraid to get beaten than maybe to make a play. Does that get frustrating as a player? And I know that's not LeBeau's, objective is to allow first downs, but at the end of the day, it seems to, with that bend don't break, allow for more first downs and more time possession than some fans love to see. But I'm wondering, from the player's perspective, does that get frustrating for you versus being completely overtly aggressive and risking the big play to make a play? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't really think it's a bend but don't break. I think that's the way the fans may look at it. But anytime you're in a blitzing attacking scheme, sometimes the blitz is going to get there, and sometimes it's not. And when it doesn't get there, your corners have to be prepared to not get beat over the top. So they may give up a pass shorter, and we can line up and play another play, than for us to blitz and teams throwing bombs over your head the whole day. Because if that happens, you're going to lose a whole lot of games real quick. So I think the fans need to look at it more as a point of, if you're going to be a team that blitzes a lot, you also have to have corners smart enough to not get you beat deep.
Right. And the way the NFL is going today, what are your thoughts on sort of the heavy lean to offense and how hard it makes a defense or for a defense these days?
I mean, that's a part of the business. We understand they got to sell tickets, and offense sells tickets. Like, if you have a game that's 3-3, you have a person like, oh, that game was boring. But a person that appreciates defense, I would watch that game and be like, that was an outstanding game. So you got a few fans that will appreciate that, but you got the other fans that want to see a 56-35 game every week, and they'll be fine with that.
We see it, fellas. Because I think the NFL does underappreciate the fans' appreciation of a good defensive struggle, but we'll see. And not much time left on this one, but I wanted to get your thoughts on the season for the Steelers. I'm not sure, again, how much in tune you are with what's going on with the team now, but what are your thoughts on what this team's going to look like this year and where you think they go this year?
I think if they can get all their guys back and healthy, it could be a scary team. I think they're going to be one of the top teams, I think, in this league as far as competing for a Super Bowl this year. And I'm looking forward to seeing what things they can do.
Are you going to get back to the Berg anytime soon and visit, or?
I've been planning on getting up there. I'm going to try to get up to a game. this year because I haven't been back in so long. And they say the city's changed so much, so I've been looking forward to getting back take a look at the city.
It has. I remember talking to Chris Fuman in Moffala a while ago, and him talking about how he walked back to the stadium with his kids, and they all yelled "foo" at him, and his kids thought the fans hated him because they read something else into that, and then he said no, he had to explain to his kid what that meant. So, yeah, I'd recommend it. It's fun to go back from all the players say. It's just a nice feeling to get back. So, any last thoughts before we let you go?
I don't know. I'm just looking forward to watching this season and looking forward to the Steelers doing some great things.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Carlos. We really appreciate you taking the time today, and we look forward to hearing back from you sometime.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos.
All right, anytime.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was Carlos Emmons, a former Pittsburgh Steeler, Philadelphia Eagle, and New York Giant. He had a very productive career, 11 years in the National Football League, and it sounds like, if you ask me, Ron, Carlos is very high on the Steelers this year.
It sure sounds like it, and he touched the point that I'm high on in that if they stay healthy, if they keep all the guys on the field, they're as dangerous as anyone. And we see year after year that's always been a struggle. So if this team can manage that one thing, I think that above maybe anything else is what gets this team over the top.
Yes, and of course, Carlos is a very easy guy to find if you want to follow him on Twitter. It's very simple. It's just at Carlos Emmons. He even has the little verified check mark that we chuckle about, but you'll see it there. He has all of his photos from his various years in the NFL. Talked about owning Wet Willie's in Atlanta. Very intelligent guy, very in tune with business, not only just the business of football, but business in general. So the only thing I wanted to ask him, Ron, and I wasn't sure how he would take it, was he was there, kind of the curse of the Thanksgiving Day Jerome Bettis coin toss type deal. If you remember heads versus tails, and then everything kind of took a tailspin for those final 2 years that he was there, which was actually the two most productive years he had while he was with the Steelers. So he really carved his niche as a 7th-round draft choice. And I spoke to Keon Adams about this as well, and maybe a little different, maybe not so different philosophy. Maybe things have changed a bit since playing last century, basically, in the 90s versus now. As long as you have your foot in the door, there's always an opportunity. And, I mean, Carlos was able to carve out an 11-year career out of being a 7th-round draft pick.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and you hear it all the time. You make a splash on special teams. You do one or two things to beat a guy in the individual practices. And then all of a sudden – you got to do something. Everyone I've ever spoken to in these players, they always say, you've got to do something to make a splash. It just takes that one, because it's more than just 60, 70 people in camp. There's all those guys are vying for the same spot. Outside linebackers could be a really interesting spot this year for this team, because you got probably 3 people vying for the last 2 spots between Moats, Adams, and Chicolo, probably all fighting for 3 people fighting for 2 spots. Adams has the toughest time because he's got to prove himself in a spot where he might not even get many reps to do it. So when he gets those reps, he's got to do something. He's got to make a splash and show something that in the few reps he gets, and that's what makes it challenging for these guys, is they don't get many chances. And so a guy like Watt, he can have a few bad practices, he's still going to be on that team. Adams, not so much.
Yeah, that's very true. I'd done a study a long while ago, somewhere on SteelCityUnderground.com. Also talked about it with the podcast in regard to, if you're a first-round pick, you're likely going to have a longer career, and other teams that may have had you on the draft board are going to give you a chance. We see it right now that Jarvis Jones didn't necessarily have the most productive career with the Pittsburgh Steelers, but still picked up by the Arizona Cardinals. I'd be willing to bet, as long as he sticks with that team this year, and I don't remember what his deal was, what he signed, if it was like a 1-year deal or whatever. But outside, I think it was
like 2 years, $4 million, something like that. Yeah, it wasn't huge.
Yeah, and like you said, you expect at least. I quote you all the time, Ron, as saying, if you sign a guy for yeah, I know you're joking, but I gotta give you credit. That's what this is all about here. So, 2-year deal, expect at least 1 year there. But I think if he plays at least one season, he'll probably find himself at least an opportunity with one more team in the NFL before he maybe fizzles and fades as a 5, 6, 7 year veteran that eventually retires.
Yeah, and these guys really, one thing as a fan we don't think about at all, maybe at all, but these guys want to be vested. So, those first 4 or 5 years, I'm not sure what the vesting is these days. I'm not sure what the rule is, but especially back in the days of like Carlos Emmons, you want to get vested. So you need to play that I think it was 4 years at the time that you need to get under your belt, 4 real seasons. So, and I think it's still something along those lines now, but I'm not sure. And if you can get that time under your belt, then, that means a big deal. So they fight hard for those first few years for some of these guys because it means everything.
Yeah, and just to explain to any listeners, by vested, it means you have to have so many years and games and things under your belt. I mean, it plays into so many different things as far as whether somebody can add you to a practice squad and if you're eligible for that, or in the case of what we're talking about here is health insurance and things of that nature going forward, at least where you're still part of that players union. And, it just helps you look after your own future. There's a little nest egg or whatever on the side that helps.
You get your pension.
Yeah, exactly.
You get a pension, and you don't get a pension unless you play so many years in the NFL. If you're 1 year and gone guy, even if you're a first-round draft pick, you don't get a pension. And no one wants to not get their pension. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just amazing. You see the guys that fade out with whether it be poor behavior, off-field behavior, whatever it may be, just outside any type of trouble, whether it's a substance abuse thing or just run-ins, with police, or just being a general fool, I guess is what I would say. And they find themselves kind of flunking themselves out of the NFL, and then what from there forward. So it's kind of in another way a bittersweet thing to talk about, but you see success story like Carlos Emmons, who came from the 7th round, plays 11 years, obviously vested, very intelligent guy, has his own business, his own plans going forward, and he knew what was going on even when he first entered the league. So it's always a refreshing story. It's refreshing to see a success story versus a lot of people always like to dwell on like some of the negative things and, this guy spent all of his money. There's several former Steelers, without naming names, that have shown up in those type of documentaries and newspaper stories and everything like that. So always good to see a story like Carlos Emmons.
And one thing that I thought was really interesting that he said as well was the discussion over learning the playbook quickly, because we always look at these athletes and say how gifted they are, how could they not have made it. But the one thing that he said that really stood out was, and we know this, but we don't always think about it, is the quicker you know the playbook, the faster you play on the field. And that's, you hear players talk about that a lot, but you don't realize it and the effect that it has on a rookie who, if you're Keon Adams, the best thing you could do is have a few sleepless nights studying the playbook so that when you are on the field, you're reacting faster and therefore making plays. Because if you don't know the playbook, you play slow because you don't know where to go, you don't know what to read, you don't know what you're reading on the field. And so you play slow and you don't make plays because of it. And a guy like Carlos Emmons, he knew, he was smart enough, maybe he had a good agent, maybe he had it on his own or both, but he knew that if he knew that playbook, he can make plays on the field a lot faster. And that's something that a lot of players, they think, like I spoke to Troy Edwards, and he's like, he came out of college and said, I knew what I needed to know. And no one could tell me that my athletic gifts weren't enough to make me succeed. And he said, I didn't listen to Hines Ward. I didn't listen to those other guys that I needed to know the playbook to be faster. I relied on one set of skills that I had from college on. When the NFL catches up to you and they get that one set of skills, you better have the full spectrum. And because he felt he knew it all and didn't listen to Hines Ward, he didn't develop. And so after that first year, he became sort of a one-hit wonder because he had nothing else to offer because he didn't take that playbook as seriously as he needed to. He had all the skills. He just didn't have the mentality. When I spoke to him a couple of years ago, he said, this is on me. It's not on Cower. I should have listened to Hines Ward and hit that playbook harder because I let everyone down because I didn't study hard enough and I couldn't make plays because of it. That's when you hear a guy like Carlos Emmons, he's the complete antithesis of this. He's less talented maybe in terms of physical skills. That's why he dropped to the 7th round. But the guy used his head, knew the playbook so well that he was able to still make plays that more talented guys may not have been able to make. So that's an interesting point to me.
Yeah, and that's really what it's about. And it's not singling out anyone like Keon Adams, for example. And, of course, TJ has name recognition with his family, his brothers playing in the NFL right now, too. So that obviously helps him. But it's you got to try and take what somebody has on film. You see these bigger colleges, like in the Big Ten, whooping up on maybe a smaller school. And then you see someone with like Keon dominating in the MAC with Western Michigan. And it's how will either of those translate to the pros? Well, we've obviously seen many success stories, whether it be our sixth-round pick like Antonio Brown on his own, or even Jerry Rice, so maybe one of the guys who went to one of the smallest colleges ever and is a Hall of Famer. So as far as it's not really singling out Keon, but it's just saying that, hey, look, a guy like Keon Adams, or even last year's seventh-round picks, you have like DeMarcus Ayers or Tyler Matakevich, and they made the roster and they're still in the mix. And this is just what it takes to make it in the NFL, because the thing that gets you noticed before you are drafted for a team, it's you're running around, and myself and Brian just said this on the last show, it's football in shorts. Well, that's not even football, really. It's you're running some drills, and it's, hey, this guy can run a tenth of a second faster than this guy's got smaller or bigger hands, smaller or longer or shorter arms. So all of that stuff goes in and factors into where you fall into, and if you happen to fall further down, it's just perceived as less value. But we've seen guys like Brett Kiesel also have a very long career after being drafted in the seventh round. Kelvin Beachum, for example, another guy undersized at his position, sounds a lot like Keon. And one thing that was interesting that Carlos said, and you alluded to too, and I'm not so sure. I know Keon said he played basically every position there was imaginable in high school, and he was a three-sport athlete when he was a teenager. But it's how does all that translate into coverage and making the team? So it sounds like if anybody's very well equipped, it wasn't anything about dogging Keon. He sounds in a very similar mold. So that's why it was great to have Carlos on and hear his stories about how he was able to carve out his own niche.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, he came in as a guy who had a little bit of advantage over some of those other defensive linemen because he was a late bloomer. And normally that's not an advantage, but in his case, it forced him to play in the secondary. And as a result, when it's time to play outside linebacker and you're forced to sort of play some coverage, it's something that he gets to lean back on again. And it's interesting too, because what you notice from guys like that too is you've got to be willing to sacrifice what you want to do for the team. A lot of guys don't like playing special teams, but if you're not shining on special teams as a seventh rounder, you might as well just pack your bags before you start. And you've got to be willing to sacrifice the big plays, in terms of sacks, for making the sort of the key plays that don't get as noticed by fans, the good coverage that stops the third down conversion because a quarterback doesn't even look that way because the guy's covered.
Yeah,
a fan might not notice that so much, but coaches certainly do. So he's got to be willing to sacrifice the sack for dropping in zones and not making the big splash play that fans recognize, but that coaches might.
Yeah, exactly. So a very great point. A lot of things that show up, even these Pro Football Focus type grading, you don't necessarily know sometimes who was whose assignment, if it was, just busted coverage, any number of factors that could really weigh in on that. But Ron, always a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for helping a guest host the show, I should say, and a little bit of extra commentary here after. Any parting words until we have you on next time?
No, we'll look to have another fun player talk a little bit about their experiences hopefully in the next time. But there's going to be a few real interesting battles in camp this year: at wide receiver, outside linebacker, and corner certainly. So it's going to be an interesting year where you're going to have a lot of really key battles and key spots that could really, really define what this team looks like, especially on defense. So it'll be a fun offseason. It'll be a fun training camp. Not something we're used to in terms of key battles in certain spots that could really, really impact the team. And like we said, they stay healthy. I think the sky's the limit.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, we have high expectations as always with all of our Pittsburgh sports teams. So once again, thank you, Ron. You can follow Ron on Twitter at Pittsburgh Sport. I'd also like to thank our special guest today, former Pittsburgh Steelers outside linebacker Carlos Emmons, who had a great career here in the National Football League, and also a shout out to StubHub. Don't forget about that special promotion that runs all weekend, 10% off Steelers tickets. Visit the website for all terms, conditions, and all details on that offer, including the special promo code and link you will need in order to get that discount. Ladies and gentlemen, that's about all I have for you today. It's been one of those knockout, drag out of the ballpark shows here. Guest host, special guest, and a new official partner here at Steel City Underground. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget about the hotline and our fan mail that is over on the website. The hotline's 203-900-4SCU, or you could email us fanmail@steelcityunderground.com. We look forward to entertaining any and all of your questions, love or hate mail. It doesn't matter. Just send something our way. But you know what? We'll wait until next time until we start addressing some of those questions. Until then, be safe, be good, and we will all catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.